Well, speaking out of recent media availability, the United States men's national team head coach Mauricio Pochettino made comments that certainly grabbed some headlines, saying, quote, "I think it's not necessary to move from MLS to Europe. The MLS, in my assessment, is maybe more competitive than some leagues in Europe." Now, obviously, MLS is more competitive than some leagues in Europe, but he seems to be suggesting, Ollie, that MLS is better than it gets credit for when you consider some of those top leagues in Europe. Do you agree with Poch, or is this an American manager sticking up for his national league?
I wish you hadn't made that clarification so I could list off all the leagues in Europe that I believe MLS is better than, starting with the Albanian Categoria Superior, and just go through them. Yeah, clearly it is better than some European leagues.
See that list.
We want to hear the list.
Yeah.
It only extends to the A countries. I didn't get past those, so don't call me out on that. I think that the big issue for MLS right now, and I tend to agree with him, and to a certain extent, that it has all the ability and the resources at this point to potentially start to challenge those bigger leagues in Europe. I don't think it's there yet, because I still think they have major problems with their season structure, and I think that's why they're considering the changing calendar. Like, the timing of the CONCACAF Champions Cup for MLS clubs is still very difficult. The MLS regular season, for me, still like too many games that don't really mean much. Loads of playoff spots, supporter shield that do teams really chase it and care about it enough? I'm not sure. And then the entire concept of the Leagues Cup is still a bit baffling to me in terms of what that does in the schedule as well. So if they can figure out that, like, the real competition part of their league, the structure of the season, I don't see any barrier for MLS to potentially being there, right there, challenging with some top European leagues in the not too distant future. I don't think it's there yet for that reason. But I think, it's a fair point to make that for some players in his squad, playing in MLS is going to be the better option. And I don't think those players should be entirely overlooked in his selection because of that.
I love MLS. I've been a fan of it even before I started covering it, which I did around 2005. So I've been consuming this league for a long time, and there's a lot of elements that I do think are absolutely underrated, undervalued, and I do think the quality is at a very good level. But there are three factors that play into it where there's a clear differential between MLS and those European leagues, and I don't think it's necessarily for the better. The first, 30 teams. It's too many. In recent years, the product, in my opinion, has become watered down a little bit. The league is very hard to follow. I think it's hard for the players to track as well. And when you have 30 teams, like the player pool, the depth pool, it's dropped off considerably, where I think there's a lot of young players domestic players coming into this league that maybe aren't quite at the level yet. So I think the 30 teams is the problem. Ollie touched on the other one. There's no jeopardy. There's no relegation. There's no threat. So the pressure to go out and perform each and every week is much different in European football. So that, to me, is a liability for MLS. And the third and final thing is supporters culture. It's nowhere near what it's like across Europe, again, with the pressure to go out and perform each and every week. You just can't let your standards drop, because the game is approached from a media perspective, from a fan perspective, much differently over there than it is over here. Like soccer, a very popular sport here in North America, but it's not NFL, it's not college football, it's not NBA, it's not Major League Baseball. So you can kind of get away with not being at your best, for weeks and still be able to kind of get by. Maybe not within your room or within your club, but from just an outsider's perspective, there's nowhere near as much pressure. And I don't think that those things are great for players. I think that you need to be in a pressure cooker. There needs to be stakes, and you need to be playing against the best of the best week in, week out, no matter what that level or that standard is. So those are the three things that are holding back MLS. Again, I love the league. I think there's so many positives about it, and the direction that it's going is generally promising as well. But those three things, those are the stark differences between, some of the European leagues I'm assuming that Pochettino is alluding to, and what's going on in MLS right now.
I'm feeling some pressure to bring a list to this segment the way you two are going, but I do have this question instead. There's perhaps some irony with the timing of Pochettino's comments about MLS perhaps being better than some European leagues, because we've never seen more Canadian men's international players in Europe than we do have right now. Could you make the case, understanding that for a lot of these players, Europe is still the ultimate dream to go prove yourself and test what you've got in the continent? But could you make the case, Gareth, that MLS could be better for a lot of these young upcoming internationals than a European league for this group right now?
Depends where you're going. I mean, we've seen players like Mathieu Chouanier go over to Switzerland, then come right back to Major League Soccer. It seemed like that was maybe a gateway out of Montreal rather than anything else. And we've seen a number of other players make the jump over and end up coming back. As long as MLS continues to offer, considerable salaries, then players are going to be drawn to where they can make money and live a comfortable lifestyle. After all, over the past, Canadians have ventured abroad to all ends of the continent and have been dealt with some very difficult situations. Ask Toss St. Ricketts about his experience in some of the places that he was overseas. So there hasn't always been guarantees in terms of playing time, the coaching style, the lifestyle, whether the player is getting paid or not. So I think it's very case dependent on where you can go. What going over to Europe absolutely does, and I think there has been in the past a little bit of a qualitative advantage, is when you're playing on the continent, then oftentimes it's easier for clubs to come and see who you're playing against with kind of like a background of what that standard or what that league looks like and where they can project you to fit in for a bigger European league. So it just seems like going to play European football put you more in the shop window. But now that we've seen some of these big moves by MLS players going overseas, perhaps things are shifting a little bit. The fact that everyone has Y-Scout, everyone can see every game. But there in the past, there's been an absolute advantage to Canadians going over to Europe, aside from what's good for just the player in that moment. And I think that will remain, that will still be the case. So again, I think it's case by case basis. Like if you're going to a good standard of football, to a good country on a good wage, where there's a level of security and the football culture is really good, then I'd absolutely encourage making that move. But simply put, that's not the case across the continent.
Yeah, I think you'd always like to see Canadian players try to challenge themselves. And I think going to Europe undoubtedly does that in a number of ways. But you also don't need to be dogmatic about it, that one is inherently better than the other one in terms of these players' careers. Like when I look at players like Richie Laryea, like Mathieu Chouanier, Jacob Schaffelberg, there's nothing wrong with these guys playing in Major League Soccer and also being in real consideration to play and to potentially even start for the Canadian men's national team. So it is kind of a boring answer, but I think it is about, player by player, finding what fits and what works best for you. And ultimately, you want to be playing football matches and not kind of sitting on a bench and having your career stall somewhere.